did you know that in this past month of January 2026, there have been five shootings of individuals involving ICE officers and Border Patrol? Five. But nobody, the politicians, the media, nobody, is talking about three of them. They're talking all sorts of trash and nonsense about Alex Preddy and Renee Good, but they're not talking about the other three. Well, what are the differences? Why not the other three? And what are the differences in those other three? Well, Renee Good and Alex Preddy are white-skinned Americans. The other three were individuals of color, Venezuelans, and illegal immigrant criminals. Those three, the illegals, actually survived. I believe all of them are still alive, albeit shot, but still alive. And I find it interesting because I've been saying for a long time, I've been seeing racism play out in the judicial system. I've been seeing racism play out before my eyes, in the media, in the court of public opinion, on YouTube, the pundits, analysts. Everything points to racism on the part of Walz, Ellison, Frey, Omar, the Fab Four. And when I was thinking about this today, and I thought, wow, that is kind of interesting that none of the Fab Four and none of the agitators and protesters are out there putting up little plushies and flower towers for the three illegals that have criminal histories, and I think at least two of them had criminal warrants for their arrest. That's why they were stopped by Border Patrol. Nobody's putting up the flower towers for them. Nobody's got signs in the crowd saying, say their names. Justice for. They're only doing it for the two white victims that died being shot to death because they were doing stupid things that got them shot. Now, I want to reiterate, as I've said before, nobody deserves to be shot to death. Nobody deserves to be shot at all. But why is it when you pan the crowds of these protesters, the violent protesters and agitators, you see white people everywhere, a sea of white people with a little speckling here and there of someone of color, but almost none compared to the vast amounts of white people. So there seems to be a great racial divide in who is sounding the alarm that that these ICE actions are race oriented, which they're not. But don't you find that interesting that the public outrage for the two white people is so intense, even though at the very least, because we don't know the whole story of either one of those shootings, we know that Renee Good and Alex Preddy knowingly, deliberately, and actively put themselves in a situation where they knew they were breaking the law, and they refused to comply. They refused to stop what they were doing and got themselves shot and killed. What is going on here? Why Why public outrage for the 2 white people and not public outrage for the other 3? Well, the other 3 were illegal. They were people of color, and they had criminal arrest warrants. They were the targets of ICE operations, not the 2 white people who chose to insert themselves into a situation that had absolutely nothing to do with them. In fact, Alex Pretty's parents, in a recent interview, stated that their son had some kind of emotional break after losing his job. He lost his job for inappropriate behavior. God knows what that means. He became emotional and incensed and started to obsess about the immigration and ICE operations. And apparently, his outrage spilled over into conversations with his parents because his parents told him, don't do it. It doesn't involve you. Stay away. And he didn't. Renee Good's family, a couple of her family members have actually been heard saying in interviews, she shouldn't have been there. It was none of her business. So we have this racial component to these agitators. The agitators, the violent people that are using their cars and guns to attack officers, they're white. The ones no one's talking about are illegal immigrants, and they're of color. Now, when you remove the race component from that, what you get is the agitators, they're not rushing to, again, put up the flower towers and the signs saying justice for, or say their name for the 3 illegals. Why? Because they know that they can't prove to the world what everybody believes, which is they want criminals in their cities. They can't risk supporting a known criminal. It speaks to that they do know better. They do know that these people don't belong here. And they choose to riot anyway. Interesting. They don't have they know. So it's fake. It's all fake. It's all lies. It's a joke. A deadly one, but a joke. Because they're faked, staged outrage. If you really cared about illegal immigration and thought that ICE was illegally removing immigrants and was harming helpless Americans, you'd be outraged for all 5 of those shootings that have taken place. 2 in Portland, 3 here in Minnesota, in 3 weeks, less than a month. But nobody's pissing and moaning about that. Isn't that interesting? Now, also what's interesting is that there is a group of Black Panther wannabes here in the city of Minneapolis. Apparently, they've taken up the identity of the Black Panthers, the infamous political organization of the 1970s. Very terrifying people, real serious people you don't want to mess with. But it is a group exclusively of African Americans who were protesting the government. The civil rights movement was really raging at the time, and they felt that you're gonna abide by the Constitution, and we're gonna blow you up. Essentially, they took things kind of extreme, but nonetheless terrifying, intimidating, and something to be respected in our American history, which is the rise and the movement of the Black Panthers. Apparently, the legit Black Panthers reached out to these yoo-hoots here in Minnesota and put them to bed. They said, you are not using our name, you are not using our logo, you are not Black Panthers, you do not stand up for what we believe in. And you know what their reasoning was? Is everybody, quite literally, everybody in those crowds are white. The Black Panthers are all for the benefit of our African American communities. Also, they made it clear to these dipshits that this is not their fight. I mean, literally, this isn't our fight. This isn't a black man's fight. So if it's not a black man's fight, whose fight is it? It's the white people's fight. Against what? Against law. Against law enforcement agencies and their officers. So when you start pulling this apart, and you know the worst part about this is that most of these Karens, if you will, that are out there protesting, they're all angry and bitter that they're not all Taylor Swift, but they're also the ones that were pushing masks, lockdowns, the snitch line here in the state of Minnesota, the COVID snitch line. Look it up. It's one of Wall's pet projects. They're also the ones that push critical race theory in the public schools. It's more like hypocritical race theory because they're not supporting people of color. They're not supporting illegals. If they were, they'd be outraged. They're not. Now we got the Black Panthers calling up black people in Minneapolis saying, oh, no. You are not us. Take that beret off and go sit the fuck down. Not our fight. Another super interesting take on this whole insane mess that's happening in Minneapolis. And speaking of the black and the white and the race thing, a couple of days ago I put out a little short video giving street cred to Ilhan Omar for going fisticuffs with her attacker when she was at that press conference demanding Kristi Noem's resignation, and the man came up and spit something at her or sprayed something at her, and everybody was outraged, and he's facing third-degree assault charges, and he's facing federal criminal charges now too. And everybody that responded to it said, "Oh, it's all fake. It's 100% staged. It's been debunked." I thought, oh, okay. So I went out and I did a lot of research. Spent a couple hours. I was looking back and forth at news media and news outlets to see if anybody was reporting on the fraud or the that it was fake news. Any kind of indication out there at all. I looked at all of the AI bots. I looked at X and Grok and everybody else, and absolutely nowhere on the face of the planet has there been any reports or verification or suggestion or investigation into whether that was a faked, staged attack or not. And when I asked individuals, well, can you cite the news outlet or the journalist or the investigative reporter, whoever that stated this was staged, it's all crickets. Nobody responded. Now, I've seen several videos of this, and I see where people get the idea that it may be staged. I'm not saying it's not or not, that it is or it's not. It just hasn't been debunked. Because the man was sitting in the front row. He was a large white man. He was sitting in the front row, and he was behaving in a manner that was not conducive with the environment and situation in which he was. He was sitting in the front row. He was wiggling around a lot, swaying and acting like he was like pretending to be drunk. He was a really bad actor if he was an actor. He was drinking a lot of water. He was exaggerating the water bottle movements and moving around, and the camera was on him and him alone at the moment that he jumped up and went for Ilhan Omar. Now, because his movements were so out of sync for everybody else and the situation, it is understandable that if the camera person had caught that they would want to kind of stop and pause with the camera lens on him for a little bit. I'm a photographer. I know a little bit about this. You're going to look and go, what's he doing? And you're going to want to watch because you're just not sure what's going on there. And because the camera was leveled on him, people insist that, okay, that's fake. You know, they were waiting for him. He was waiting for a trigger. And then when he got up and he did what he did and she ran up to him, and that if somebody was a would-be, assaulter or attacker, that you would run the other way. Well, first of all, her security staff did nothing. They were idiots. But I personally, in my life, have gone aggressively crazy on criminals holding semi-automatic guns aimed at me, and I charged them and I argued with them and I got them to leave. I'm not afraid of that kind of situation. It's a scary situation and you run the risk, but you run the risk of getting killed, maimed, tortured, whatever, if you cooperate with gunmen. This guy didn't have a gun. Maybe she didn't even know he squirted her with vinegar because, it was probably a syringe. It was probably really tiny. Maybe she didn't know. But he was of no threat to her. That does not mean that she knew him or that this was staged or planned. It simply means that she did not feel, regardless of what he was doing, that he was a threat, and it didn't matter what he was doing. Could have been a stranger at the bus stop. She more than likely just did not view him as a life and death threat. That doesn't admit guilt in some kind of stage. I also know people are like, well, she's trying to take the heat off of herself for the fraud. And yeah, that could be. Anything is possible at this point. I'm not saying that it's not faked. And I do absolutely 1000% see where the individuals who are online saying, look at this video, this is fake. I absolutely see what you're seeing and why you see this as a hoax. And I'm hoping that they'll find out, because if it's a hoax, it needs to be exposed. But as an investigator, as having some Homeland Security and investigative and law enforcement behind me a little bit, I do understand how evidence is interpreted to some minor degree. I do have a bit of comprehension in there. And I can tell you that if you took those videos without hearing any kind of statements or interviews from the perpetrator or from Ilhan Omar herself, we're not going to have any clue about what really went down. And it'll take a little bit of time. And if you can't just say, well, it's 100% debunked just because you looked at a video and in your impression of that video, everything was fine. Everybody has an impression of the video that Alex Pretty was a bad shoot. But now we're getting information that other videos coming in and being reviewed show that he actually shot at the officers at close range with his own gun. So nothing is as it seems. Even if you catch it on video, that doesn't mean what you're seeing is actually what was happening in the larger context of the situation. So I do think that this guy, being a white guy, a big, hulking, Dumbo white guy, and his behavior and stuff does really totally reek of staged. And that it was a white man going after the woman of color, because she hates white people. She hates Americans. That's racial as well. So the racial component here is pretty ironic, and I hope that others will think about what I've said here today and kind of, give their own impressions and kind of pull it apart a little bit at the different points of all of this outrage and this civil war in Minneapolis, and the racial component to it, and the fact that, yes, there have been 5 shootings in the United States in this month alone, January 2026, but the only 2 anybody are talking about are the 2 white people. And I don't want to come out and say they deserved it, but they knew that the chance of them being shot was very real. And nobody puts themselves in that position deliberately. That's why I think there was some level of manipulation or ball dropping by our government for letting mentally ill people run wild and free. That's a video for another day. And until next time, do good and be good.